Let's recite, let's recite Om 3 times. Inhale. Invocation. Yogena chittasya padena vacha malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi. Excuse me. Abahu purushakaram shankhachakrasidharinam sahasra shirasam shvetam pranamami patanjalim. I respectfully bow down with folded hands and offer my salutations to sage Patanjali, the highest among the munis, who has presented the remedies for removing the impurities of the body through his treatise on Ayurveda, of language, through his treatise on grammar called Patanjali Mahabhashya, and the impurities of the mind through his treatise on yoga, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I bow down to Patanjali, whose upper body is of human shape, who is carrying a conch, a discus, and a sword, and has 1,000 bright heads. Okay, so in our session last time, we completed our discussion of the 5 yamas and the 5 niyamas. So we can move on now to the next limb of the 8 limbs of yoga, which is asana, basically. Okay, so we did this last time. Can everyone see the screen? Should be okay, right? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So this is what we did last time. Last one was the Ishvara Pranidhana, and we finished that discussion. And let's move on to asana. Okay, so the sutra is Sthira Sukham Asanam. So you want to repeat after me? Sthira Sukham Asanam. So asana is steady, comfortable sitting posture. And there are just 2 words basically, sthira and steady. And sthira means stable, unmoving, not shaking, etc., steady. And sukham is comfortable. And asana is, of course, asana. All right. So this is the very basic definition of asana. All right. So let's move on to some of the notes. So the word asana is derived from the root word as, which means to sit. In Sanskrit, as means to sit. So asana basically is a seated posture. Okay, the sitting posture, and obviously because Patanjali's whole objective is to sit and meditate. Of course, he recommends pranayama, but then immediately move on to meditation. So that's all he wants us to do. I mean, he in his approach, he has no mention of asanas like warrior pose and headstand and shoulder stand and all that. None of that is mentioned there. It's all he says is sit down, do some pranayama, and get into meditation. That's it. So, and it comes from the root word as, which means to sit. And it's also the seat. When we talk about asana, it's also what you're sitting on. So for example, at this time, I'm sitting in this chair. So this chair is my asana. All right. If I'm sitting in a bench, the bench becomes my asana. If I'm on a mat, yoga mat, the mat is my asana. So that's also the other meaning of asana. And of course, once Patanjali gave all these guidelines, and people realized that it was very hard to sit and meditate for long periods of time, because after a few minutes, your shoulders would hurt, your knees would hurt, your hips would hurt, or whatever, and you either had to stretch out or just do something, move around. So, the yogis who came afterwards, they developed all these other hatha yoga practices. We know the term hatha yoga. And these practices now, of course, they include all kinds of asanas where you do, warrior pose and sitting poses, reclining poses, inversion poses, and all that. But then, rather than coining a new name, I guess they decided to keep the same name, asana, for every one of those also. Even though it doesn't mean a standing posture, it still means the sitting posture. Okay? And then sthira, of course, is no shaking, trembling, sukham, and steady. The posture, sukham, that means comfortable and steady posture is required to practice the subsequent limbs of yoga. We have pranayama practices and all the meditation practices, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, all those things. So you need a good, comfortable posture for all those practices. And of course, to get into all this, you still need to follow right from the beginning, yamas and niyamas. They have to be followed. So in a sense, everything follows a progression, in that sense, because unless you have nice control over your vrittis, like the mind control through yamas and niyamas, it's really very hard to focus on anything else. Okay, so everything kind of follows one after the other. So in Hatha Yoga, various asanas are practiced to develop a strong and flexible body, resulting in comfortable and steady seated posture for pranayama and meditation. So remember, the whole purpose of all the asanas, etc., that are practiced as part of Hatha Yoga is still the same thing, is to be able to sit and meditate for long periods of time. Okay? And then, they mentioned that asanas and pranayama help remove all these impediments. I think we talked about these 9 impediments in Sutra 130 and the accompanying symptoms in 31. And I think I have a list here of these 9, very kind of, we don't need to go through this. We already went through this. So these are things like disease, dullness, doubt, carelessness, etc. And then they are accompanied by mental pain, dukkha, and despair, etc., nervousness, trembling of the body, etc., etc. We basically talked about these. So here, again, to recap, asana literally means a sitting posture, and the name has been extended to all the other postures that we practice in our Hatha Yoga practice, just for the sake of continuity of name, I guess. Okay. Let's move on to the next sutra. So this is again a continuation of the same theme, sukham, sthiram and sukham. How do you attain those? So that's what it says now here. So let's read the sutra. Prayatna shaithilya ananta samapatti bhyam. So those are the 2 kind of phrases here, 2 clauses you can call them. So you can repeat after me. Prayatna shaithilya ananta samapatti bhyam. Okay. The meaning is, the posture is mastered by relaxing the effort and by meditating on the infinite. So we'll see what that means now. All right. So let's move on to the words here individually. Prayatna means effort, strong effort. Yatna means effort. When you add the prefix pra, kind of amplifies it. In most cases, the prefix pra amplifies the meaning. So effort, basically. Shaithilyam is to have Loose, Shaithalya means loose, something is which is very loose, that's called Shithila. That's the Sanskrit word, Shithila, loose, relaxed, okay? So Shaithalya means relaxed or loose, no tightness, no tension, etc. That's Shaithalya. That means Prayatna Shaithalya means basically let go of any unnecessary effort, okay? That's the only way you can have a sthira pose. If you keep making effort, then you will always have that little bit of trembling, shaking, etc. Ananta, anta means the end, ananta means which has no end, the infinite or the, okay, now lots of different interpretations of this ananta. One of them is the cosmic serpent Shesha, who holds the words upon his heads. Actually, there are 1,000 heads there. Shesha. Okay, Samapatti Dhyam means the Samapatti basically is roughly equivalent to state of meditation. Samapatti. Deep absorption is Samapatti. Samapatti. Apatti means to get absorbed. Samapatti is kind of a very deep, continuous flow of absorption. That's Samapatti. So something like a deep state of samadhi, you can call it. All right. So absorption of the mind. So that's the meaning of this word, of this phrase, that that through these two, what are these two? Through giving up any effort of any unnecessary effort, and also ananta samapatti, deep absorption in something. You know what that is, that's left for interpretation, right? That's our interpretation now. We'll talk about that. And through that, what are we trying to achieve? Sthira Sukham Asanam. So he says, first he defines it, and then he says, do these to get there, to make the asana very sthira and sukham. All right? Let's move on. So again, a few notes. Prayatna Shaithalyam is the same thing, letting go of an unnecessary effort. I like to call it effortless effort, basically, because you still have to set the intention. If you want to touch your toes, your mind has to set the intention that I'm going to try and touch my toes. And there's a subtle effort required, but then it should not be forced in any way. That's the idea here. And that's why I've added here, no role should be played by the ego. If the ego plays a role, we know we are in trouble. Okay. Now, the Ananta, like I said, there are different interpretations by different authors, and we'll see what that means. Ananta is endless space. That's one interpretation. Akasha, outside and inside the body. Allow the body to become one with this vast space. That's one interpretation. The other is meditation on endless. Ananta also translated as the snake that upholds the earth, symbolizes strength and steadiness. Same thing, steadiness, because again, in some of the ancient texts, you will see that earthquake happens because the Ananta was trying to readjust his head. I've read it somewhere that this Shesha, they call it the Shesha Naga, or the serpent Naga, who was trying to maintain the earth in its perfectly balanced position, but then, for some, it has 1,000 heads. Occasionally it had to shift position. So that's why the earthquakes happen. One way of looking at it. Now, it can also mean Ananta, if it represents a snake, then it also can mean the Kundalini Shakti. Kundalini is the power of the energy that lies at the base of the spine. We all know that. Kundalini Shakti. Okay. So, I didn't mention my own interpretation of what happened here. All right. I will add a sentence here. My own interpretation of this whole sutra is Ananta Samapatti. Ananta means a very deep, Samapatti is meditation. Meditation on what? What I'm suggesting is that you get very deeply engrossed, almost like a deep state of meditation on what you're experiencing at any given moment during your practice. So let's assume that I'm doing my asana practice and I'm doing a warrior pose. Okay. What I'm suggesting is Ananta Samapatti means you are so deeply aware of what's going on in the body, maybe in your thighs, maybe in your spine or your shoulders, that your mind is completely focused on that. It doesn't get distracted at all. And that's the best way to maintain a very safe practice and maintain a very enjoyable practice. And when those two things happen, safe and enjoyable practices, then you get the maximum benefit out of your practice. Otherwise, you won't get maximum benefit. So my interpretation of this Ananta Samapatti, this is just my own personal experience, is that you focus on your experience at that moment. And experience is happening, I don't know if I talked about it, but they say that there are 5 levels of experience. Did I mention that? Most of you know this, I think. Does everyone know the words Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, etc.? Who doesn't know? Have you heard the terms Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha? Nimesha, are you familiar with these terms? No. Okay. Let me hold off that discussion maybe for another day. But basically what we're saying is there are 5 layers of experience. One is the physical body at the physical level. The second is the Pranamaya Kosha, which is the breath, basically the pranic energy, the prana, vital life force level, physiological functions, etc. And the Manomaya Kosha is the mind, where all the thinking, all the worrying, all that other stuff happens, anger, anxiety, etc. But then beyond that, if we can transcend the limitations, which is largely put by the ego, then we can go into the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is pure intellectual wisdom. Okay, that's the awareness that we want to build, which eventually leads us to the awareness of the Ananda state. Ananda is kind of a pure state of, you can call it inner joy. Okay, unalloyed, uncluttered joy. You can think of it that way. Okay, so that's what we want. My suggestion that is Ananta Samapatti. I'm saying that make it into a very deep meditative experience of whatever you're going through at these 5 levels. Okay, that's my interpretation. Any thoughts or comments on this? I should mention that, my own interpretation. All right. So the next one is number 48. So the sutra is Tataha Dvandva Anabhighataha. Tataha Dvandva Anabhighataha. The meaning is, thereafter, one is undisturbed by the dualities. Okay. So you can repeat after me. Tataha. Even though the Sanskrit word written here is tato, but when you start pronouncing it separately, then you have to break that rule, sandhi rule, and then it becomes tataha. Okay, tataha, dvandva, anabhighataha. Okay, the meaning is, tataha means consequently, or from this, from what? From this statement where we said, Prayatna Shaithalyam Anant Samatapatti Bhyam Sthira Sukham Masanam. So when you have a very steady and a very comfortable pose, very steady and comfortable pose, then you are not a victim of all the dualities. Okay, now the commentators don't give a lot of discussion on this. So the words are, Dvandva means dualities by the opposites. Anabhighataha. It comes from abhighataha first, and then we add the prefix an, that means it's negated. Abhighata means attack, basically. Ghata means strike, to have, it is like striking somebody. If you hit somebody, that's abhighata. So anabhighata means you're not struck by anything. That means you're not affected. You're not afflicted by anything. That's the meaning given here. The literal meaning is to strike and hit somebody. That's abhighata. Okay. Anabhighata means not affected by anything. All right. By the dualities. So again, like I said, the commentators don't say a whole lot. What they're saying is the pairs of experiences are like, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, hunger and thirst. They are kind of the pairs of experiences, right? Dualities. Now, because we have become so deeply engrossed in our experience of the asana practice, and of course, Patanjali only meant the sitting posture, right? So assume that we are only in a sitting posture, in a meditative posture, and we are so deeply comfortable and relaxed, and there's nothing going on. What that does to us is we kind of lose any awareness of any physical sensations that might be going on in the body, anything. That's the goal, right? That's the goal of sitting in meditation, because you don't want to be bothered by stuff happening in the body. If there's a little pain in my leg or a little pain in my knee or shoulder, there's no way I'm going to be focused on meditation. So no sensations should be experienced in the mind when we are sitting and meditating. And then we have extended the definition of asana to all these standing postures, inversions and all that, that experience doesn't change. There also you want to be so deeply engrossed in the experience that you don't feel anything, right? That there is no sensation felt completely. All right. So like I said, this is necessary for the other limbs like pranayama, pratyahara, and meditation, etc. Okay, these very beautifully relaxed and comfortable posture is very essential for all the remaining limbs as well. Okay, and then it develops really willpower necessary for undertaking long periods of meditation. Okay, strong willpower. All right, that's the statement tataha dvandva anabhighataha, number 48.
So Subhashi, a question for you. Does this mean that he's saying you're focusing on your breath so much that you lose awareness of your body? Is it like you're doing it in a very meditative state?
Yes, you're focusing on everything. Even the experience during asana practice, like I said, you're focusing even on your body. So if you're having a subtle experience, let's say in your thigh, I'm just picking an example, right? But now you're so deeply engrossed in that experience, you don't seem to feel anything else in the body. And then you automatically withdraw from that experience also, and you are very deeply focused on, it becomes internalized, right? When we meditate, even though we start with a gross object, then eventually everything becomes subtler and subtler and subtler. Then once you are meditating on your stretch in the thighs, then all you're feeling at that moment is deep meditation. You're not feeling that there is a thigh stretch. Some experience, that's it. That experience is the only thing that you have in the mind. Where it's coming from, what it's like, none of that. It's a very deep state.
Thank you.
And of course, breathing, like you mentioned rightly, awareness on the breath also helps with all this.
I have a question, Subhash.
Yes.
So you mentioned at the time he wrote this, they only were talking about sitting postures. So
right.
when did all the other asanas?
I'm assuming that the asanas started developing right after that, but the text that is normally mentioned as the one which is the standard text, which is called Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Okay? Mm-hmm. That text is only about, according to some estimates, about 800, maybe 900 years old. Okay. Whereas Yoga Sutras are more than 2,000 years old.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So the assumption is that all the evolution and development, all the other asanas had started right after Patanjali wrote the text, but then they were consolidated in a textual form in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is about 800-900 years old.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to number 49. Let me read the sutra. Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasayoho gati vichhedah pranayamaha. That's the definition of pranayama according to the sutras. Okay, so Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasayoho gati vichhedah pranayamaha. The meaning is that, okay, firm and comfortable posture being acquired or established, controlled interruptions in the movements of inhalation and exhalation is pranayama. Okay, so you can repeat after me now. Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasayoho gati vichhedah pranayamaha. That's the definition of pranayama. The words are tasmin sati. Tasmin sati means being established in that. In what? The asana. We're still talking about the asana here. Okay, I mean, the previous, always when we refer to something, it's always the previous sutra or the set of previous sutras, right? That's what we talked about, asana. And then it says Tasmin sati. Tasmin sati simply means on being established in that. In what? In that very stable and very comfortable posture. Okay. Then shwasa means inhalation. Prashwasa means exhalation. All right. So gati means movement, and vichheda, different commentators will give you different meanings of this gati vichheda. And I have a few examples of what different commentators have translated this as, but mostly regulation, suspension, breaking, all that stuff. And that's pranayama. So after you have established that firm and steady posture called asana, then the shwasa and prashwasa, that's the inhalation and exhalation, should be controlled in some manner. That becomes pranayama. All right. So firm and comfortable asana is a prerequisite for the practice of pranayama and subsequent limbs. Right. 4 phases of breathing up. This is from common knowledge that we have during, based on most of the recent literature on pranayama. You have inhalation, which is puraka, exhalation, which is rechaka, and retention after inhalation is called antara kumbhaka, and retention after exhalation is called bahya kumbhaka. Patanjali has not used any of these terms, but these are taken from mostly from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, okay, and some other texts. They all use these. The currently used terms are puraka, rechaka, and kumbhaka. Okay? And then we know that breath is a gross manifestation of prana, which is the very essence of our life force, prana. And breath is a gross manifestation. In fact, prana sometimes loosely translated as breath also. Breath is also used as a translation of prana. And they always mention that, look, prana itself is the link between body and mind. And the vehicle for this prana is the pranamaya kosha. Remember, I just mentioned there are 5 koshas, or the 5 layers of our being, okay, where we can experience life basically. Okay, and then this is the pranamaya kosha. Okay, and with all its channels, they're called nadis. Now, I don't want to spend time on Kundalini aspect of yoga. That's a long discussion in itself. Okay, but that's basically what it is. So just to give you a sample of the meaning of gati, I just picked up from maybe 3 or 4 different authors. meaning of Gati Vicheda by different authors, how different they are. Breaking, B-R-A-K-I-N-G, the force and uncontrolled movement. They don't explain very well, what that means. Breaking the force and uncontrolled movement of what? Of the breath, inhale and exhale, basically. That's Swami Veda Bharati. Regulation of the flow. This is from Aranya, Swami Aranya. Regulation of the flow. Okay. Controlling the movements, Satchidananda, controlling the movements of breath. Regulation of the breath, Bryant. Cessation of inspiration and expiration, timely, cessation of inspiration. Break, this break is different from this break. This B-R-A and this is B-R-E-A-K, break in the movement. This is another author, Karambelkar. And then cessation of the movement, Satyananda. So, and then when they go into explanations, each one has a slightly different approach to explaining what the Gati Vicheda means. Again, from my simplistic perspective, I have given you my interpretation, which is this, that you inhale, exhale, you can hold the breath after inhalation, you can hold the breath after exhalation. Common practice, okay? That's what we do in our pranayama practices. At least that's what I do in my practices. All right. So, Gati Vicheda, it comes from the root word is chid, which means actually to create a hole in something. That means chid. Okay. And Vicheda is something that has already been pierced. Okay. And then Gati is the movement. So when you say Gati Vicheda means the movement has been pierced, that means it has been interrupted, basically. That's what literal meaning is. Gati is the movement of what? Shwasa and Prashwasa, inhalation and exhalation. The movement of inhalation and exhalation has been pierced. And that's the literal meaning. Give me a second. Okay, I apologize. Interruption. Okay, so you get the idea, right? This is how different authors are going to give you slightly different interpretation. Now, I just picked it up from the chapter 1 because there is a mention of prana in the chapter 1 also, but that's in a different context and we haven't covered that area here, but the idea was in the chapter 1, how to calm the mind, how to keep the mind calm, peaceful, okay? And there they had given a few different approaches. One of them I think we did talk about, where we talked about this Maitri, Karuna, etc. Those 4 attributes, and then 4 kinds of people who you encounter in your life. That's one way of calming the mind, but then they go on to do a few other approaches. Okay, and one was that the prana. Okay, how do you control the prana? Okay, so what it says was that the mental calm is attained by the controlled exhalation and retention of breath. Again, there was quite a lot of difference in the interpretation by different authors. The word is vidharana, okay? Prachardana means, again, it's the same as prashwasa. Prachardana means exhalation. So exhalation and vidharana, different interpretations. It comes from dha. Dha means to hold something. So vidharana could mean just hold the breath. Or it could also mean control the breath. Vidharana. What are you controlling? Prachardana. which is exhalation. So controlled exhalation and retention of breath is a way to calm the mind, okay, of prana. Prana means breath here, basically. I just picked it up from chapter 1, just to give you an idea that even in chapter 1, the breath was talked about, okay? Let's move on. Now what he's saying is, what are the different kind of variables that you can use to control your breath? Okay. All right. So the sutra is Bahyabhyantara stambha vrittihi desha kala sankhya paridrishtaha dirgha sukshmaha. That's the sutra here. So again, let me read it one more time. Bahyabhyantara stambha vrittihi desha kala sankhya paridrishtaha dirgha sukshmaha. Meaning is the modifications of the life breath, that's prana, are either external, internal, or stationary. Okay. They are to be regulated by space, time, and number, and are either long or short. I'm not sure I like this translation very much, but we'll see. It's okay. So you can repeat after me now these words. Bahya Abhyantara Stambha Vrittihi Desha Kala Sankhya Paridrishtaha Dirgha Sukshmaha. Okay. So he's talking about pranayama now. So these are the attributes of pranayama. Right? The word bahya means external. Bahya, external. Abhyantar is internal. Abhyantar. Antar is inner. Abhyantar is internal, deep inside. Stambha means holding something. Literal meaning of stambha, one of the literal meaning of stambha is a pillar. A pillar is something that doesn't move. So in that sense, when the breath is not allowed to move, that becomes stambha. So breath, you hold the breath, that means suppressed. Not suppressed. What will it be? Stambha, holding the breath, basically. Vritti is movements. Okay, vritti is movements, fluctuations. It's the same word we have used in yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. Desha means a physical location, a place. Okay, desha. Kala means time. And sankhya means number, quantity. Okay. Paridrishta is it's not manifest. I'm going to say carefully examined, something like that. Paridrishta, not manifest. I'm going to change it and then I'll check later. Dirgha is long or sometimes even big, long, something even loud, sometimes is dirgha. Sukshma is very subtle, soft, etc. Okay, so that's the meaning here. So the meaning is that, look, there are three kinds of modifications that you can do to your breathing. One is the external, that means you have exhaled and then do some modification. Inhale, abhyantar means inhale and then do some modification. Then hold the breath and do some modification. And they should be all controlled based on desha, kala, sankhya. Desha means location, physical place. Kala is time and sankhya is number. So by that you can control these external, internal, and restrained vrittis. Okay. And then what happens? The breath becomes dirgha and sukshma. Dirgha means very long or maybe forceful sometimes, dirgha, but mostly long, big. Dirgha means big or long. And sukshma means very subtle, very, very gentle, very non-perceptible, so to say. All right. Let's see. So 3 attributes of breath: inhalation, abhyantara; exhalation, bahya vritti; and breath retention, stambha vritti. Okay. I'm going to call it stambha is breath retention. Suppressed. That's okay. Leave it at that for now. Okay, so let's try and see what these other words mean, desha, etc. Again, different commentators have given different interpretations, and awareness on some physical location in the body. You can focus on your nose, for example, your forehead, or one of the chakras. That's another way to look at physical location. And there are 7 chakras in the body: Mooladhara chakra, Swadhisthana, etc. So many of you know these words. Okay. You can have the tip of the nose, like I said, or any of the chakras. That's the physical location. The other way to look at physical is breathing through either one nostril or through both nostrils. That's physical. Then, how far is your breath going when you exhale? Okay, how far does it reach? All right. You can measure, roughly, if you can feel the breath here, 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 etc. How far does it go? Okay, same length, same thing with the inside. How far does it go? Okay, first of all, it is going through the nasal passage, bronchial cavity, and then, of course, it is going into the lungs. But then the prana, you can feel different parts of the body. They say even in the heart, you can feel the prana, or even deeper inside the body, etc. So all that is physical. Okay, and even in the lungs, how far deep into the lungs you go, upper part, middle part, lower part, etc., etc. That's all desha. Kala means duration of each inhalation, exhalation, and retention. Sankhya is number, how many times you are doing each of these components: inhalation, exhalation, etc. Okay. Dirgha means prolonged, forceful or prolonged, and sukshma means almost imperceptible, subtle. Okay. So what that means is that he is defining some of these attributes, some of these parameters, some of the variables that you can use to define your various pranayama practices. That's what we are looking at here. Okay. So, and my example that I've given is, so in the practice that we call Nadi Shuddhi, or the alternate nostril breathing, again, based on some of the texts that we have seen, you can have a ratio of inhale, retention, and exhale. And commonly mentioned ratios are like 1:2 or 1:4:2, etc. And I'm sure most of you know this. Okay. So inhale for, let's say, 5 seconds, hold it for 10 seconds, and then exhale for 10 seconds. I'm just picking a number. Okay. Or you can go all the way to 1:4:2, etc., etc. So these are some of the ways you can vary the kala, or the time duration. And with practice over a period of time, one can prolong each breath and make it very subtle. When you do the practice for a long time, you're able to control the quality of your breath and make it so soft and subtle that at some point you won't be able to hear your own breath. Okay? That's how subtle it will become. And it will be so smooth that you will not feel any movement in the breath. Okay? That's how it can happen. Now, the word paridrishta means close up. That's what it is. Close observation. Drishta means seen, something that is seen. Paridrishta means you have seen it very, very, very clearly, very closely. Okay? So basically, it is perfection or deep awareness of the full breathing cycle. That's paridrishta. Why was it manifestation here? I just changed it to is carefully examined. I think I prefer that. Very carefully examined. Okay. So based on the parameters and the variables that Patanjali has mentioned here in this sutra, many pranayama practices have evolved. Many. We only do a few in my classes, and I have listed here the ones that I consider very basic. I'm sure you know most of these words: Kapalabhati, Bhastrika, Ujjayi pranayama, then the rapid breathing, and Bhramari is the humming bee, and then alternate nostril breathing. I consider these 6 as a very basic kind of the core set of pranayama practice, among many others that we can learn. But these are the very basic core set that I practice and teach. Then I have actually a book in Hindi, in my language Hindi. At the end of that book, it lists almost like, I think about 70, 71 different pranayama practices. You tweak something here, tweak something there, and give it a different name, call it a different pranayama practice, etc. People have done that. Okay. So that's the sutra where you are looking at some of the attributes and variables given by Patanjali. All right. Now here he goes into the next one, number 51. Let me read the sutra. Bahyabhyantar vishayakshepi chaturthaha. So Bahyabhyantara Vishayakshepi Chaturthaha, that pranayama which goes beyond the sphere of internal and external is the fourth one, fourth variety. You can repeat after me. Bahya Abhyantara Vishaya Akshepi Chaturthaha. Okay. Again, Bahya means external. Abhyantara means internal. They are the same words used earlier also, Bahya and Abhyantara. Vishaya. Vishaya means the sphere, basically, the range of your breathing, the context of your breathing, etc. Akshepi means surpassing. Okay. Akshepi means not confined. That's what it means. Akshepi means not confined. Chaturtha just means fourth. Okay. Again, this sutra, not many people have really explained it very well. Everyone has tried, kind of given their own kind of thoughts. Nobody has made it very clear as to what that means. All right. And there is no consensus among commentators as to the exact nature of this fourth pranayama. Okay. So everyone is kind of dilly-dallying around. It also, and some of these people have called it Sahaja Kumbhaka or Kevala Kumbhaka. Okay, spontaneous breath retention. That's what it means. Sahaja or Keval Kumbhaka. It means achieving a state of Kumbhaka without recourse to either inhalation or exhalation. That's what it says. Bahya Vyantara Vishaya Akshepi. Akshepi means without recourse to it, without any awareness of it. Okay. And usually they say it happens in the very deepest states of meditation that you can actually suspend your breath. It happens automatically, they say. Talking of this suspension, just want to mention that I have a cousin who lives in Bangalore in India, and he's been kind of practicing yoga techniques of various kinds for a very long time. And he claims, at least that's what he mentions, that he sits for meditation for at least 2 hours every morning. And he says during that time, that there is at least a duration of 1 hour, maybe longer, when his breath is completely suspended. He doesn't breathe at that time. That's what he says. I never got a chance to test it out, but that's what he claims. Okay, so when mastered, it leads to merging of individual prana and cosmic prana. We know that, we are a part of this cosmic prana, and they say everything runs with prana. The whole universe is sustained and run through the, cosmic prana. That's what they claim. Okay. Now, again, from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, remember there's the text which has all the practices. So just picking up two verses from here which talk about this kumbhaka. So considering puraka, inhalation, rechaka, exhalation, and kumbhaka, retention, pranayama is of three kinds. So puraka, kumbhaka, and exhalation. But considering it as accompanied by puraka and rechaka, it means breath retention. So considering the breath retention as accompanied by puraka and rechaka, and without these, it's of two kinds. So one is with puraka and rechaka, and one is without puraka and rechaka, without inhalation and exhalation. So one is called sahita, that means with, and the other is called kevala, that means alone, without the inhalation and exhalation. And exercise in sahita should be controlled, should be continued until success in kevala is gained. This latter is simply confining the air with ease without rechaka and puraka. The same concept that it is completely spontaneous breath retention during deep states of meditation. All right, that's spontaneous without, that means you're not even aware that you're breathing, either inhaling or exhaling, and yet you get into a state of kevala kumbhaka, that is called, or sahaj kumbhaka. That's the fourth variety of pranayama. Okay. All right. So now he talks about two of the basic benefits of pranayama. Okay, let's look at the first one. Tataha kshiyate prakash avaranam. Tataha kshiyate prakash avaranam. As a result, the veil over the inner light is destroyed. Okay. So tataha means, oh, you repeat after me. Tataha kshiyate prakash avaranam. Again, the whole sentence is tataha kshiyate prakash avaranam. You can repeat that. Not too long. Tataha means then. Then, of course, referring to the previous sutra, that means you have applied all these practices of pranayama. So when you practice pranayama, basically, tataha, then kshiyate is weakened or destroyed. Okay, kshiyate could be weakened or destroyed. Prakasha, weakened or destroyed. Prakasha means illumination, light, avarana is covering or the veil. Okay, so avarana is the veil or the covering. So the veil over the inner light is destroyed. What does that mean here? So remember when we started the discussion of chapter 2, we talked about all these 5 kleshas, and they are, does anyone remember the 5 kleshas? We talked about those in the beginning. 5 kleshas.
Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha.
Very nice. So that's the avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. Avidya is ignorance, not knowing who we are in reality. And asmita is ego. Raga is strong attachments or likes. Dvesha is strong dislikes. Abhinivesha is basically fear of death, or the strong desire to keep this body in its current shape, something like that, abhinivesha. But then any of these, basically these kleshas, which are predominantly, influenced by the ego, okay, they produce this bag of karmas, because all the actions are done because we like something or we don't like something. All the actions, okay. That's why you get this bag of karmas. And what we're saying is, when the body, when the prana is stabilized through pranayama practices, the mind and body are stabilized. And then because the mind is stabilized, there is less of this raga and dvesha. That's what we're trying to do here. Raga and dvesha should be reduced in their intensity. When we don't have as many likes and dislikes, then the effect of that means the karma bag that we have, the bag of karmas, that becomes lighter. Not too many karmas are produced then. Okay. Therefore, the sanskaras and influence of the ego are diminished, and then the veil on illumination is weakened, because ego is the one which puts a lid on that illumination. Where is that illumination coming from? What are we talking about here? Illumination of what? Where is it coming from? Any thoughts?
Illumination from the, we can say, the prana or the soul.
Soul, yes, pure consciousness. That's what we talk about. In the Sankhya philosophy, there is a lot of mention of this reflected consciousness which illumines the intellect, mind, etc. Reflected consciousness illuminating the buddhi. Buddhi is the intellect. That's what they talk about in Sankhya. So, and that illumination is not visible to us in our normal state because the ego is so strong, and therefore all the vrittis are in the mind are so strong. There's a constant chatter, constant churn in the mind, and there is no way to peep, or there's no way to get a glimpse of that beautiful illumination behind the head. So when we are doing all these practices of meditation, pranayama, etc., then that's why the karma, there's not so much activity in the mind. All the karma bag, this bag of karma, that's weakened. And then there is fewer samskaras and smaller influence of the ego. And now we can get to this elimination. Okay? Then we can see that purity of wisdom, they call it. The word that Patanjali has used in the first chapter is called prajna. Some of you may have heard the term Prajna, prajna. That's the pure wisdom. That's illumined by the pure consciousness. But then we don't have access to that because of all this ego and samskaras and all this bag of karmas. Okay, so that's what he's saying, that by practicing pranayama, that veil, that covering over that light is going to be weakened, and we can get access to, at least get a glimpse of that beautiful, pure wisdom. Okay. And what's the second benefit? Now it says, dharanasu cha yogyata manasaha. Dharanasu cha yogyata manasaha. And the mind becomes fit for concentration. Various practices of dharana. Okay. You can repeat after me. Dharanasu cha yogyata manasaha. So dharana su means for concentration. Okay. Now, this word dharana su is in the plural number. There are singular, dual, and plural in Sanskrit. Dharana su is plural. Okay. And cha means and. Yogita is fitness, ability, competency, etc. And manasaha, of the mind. So, of the mind, that means now, obviously the goal is eventually to sit and meditate. So what it's saying is that through the practices of pranayama, okay, first of all, it says that the veil over the light is weakened, and cha means and. In addition to that, what happens? Your mind becomes more capable of going into states of dharana. Okay? Different practices of dharana are mentioned in many, many texts. And he says dharana su, plural. Okay? You can devote your mind much more effectively to these dharana practices. Okay? That's the meaning here. So pranayama is considered one of the greatest forms of tapas. That's from one of the texts I was reading. Okay? Because people become very, very, almost they gain supernormal powers just through pranayama, some of them. There are instances in the past that mention he did pranayama like this, that, and he developed this supernormal capability, etc. So lots of benefits. And mind is stabilized by stabilizing the breath and the body. And all the activities of the mind are controlled by prana. And if prana is controlled, you can control the mind. That's mentioned in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika also, that by controlling the prana, you can control the mind. And a stable, pure mind is then able to enter the state of dharana. Remember, dharana is the initial state of meditation, much more easily.
Subhashi, can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm wondering more about the order of these things. I think you had said that some people think that you should do them all in a certain order, and some people don't think you should do it that way. But, with this one, it's saying after pranayama, then the mind becomes fit for concentration. And then previously it said, in order to do pranayama, you have to have a solid asana practice. So should we be meditating if we are not solid in the other things that come before?
Well, it depends. If you have been doing all these things for a long time, then, immediately the timing doesn't matter, right? If you have done, let's say, a nice asana practice one day and pranayama practice, and you want to sit down and meditate the next day, it should be okay because your mind is still having the effects of these previous days' practices. It's fine to do that. But what they're saying is that, look, pranayama will help you calm the mind. And to get into pranayama, you have to be able to sit comfortably. That's why that sthira sukham asana becomes very important. That means you have to sit, nice, comfortable posture, which is not shaking, moving, trembling, etc. So these things are kind of in a continuum. But if you're doing it every day for so many years, it doesn't matter then, because you're still having the effects of all these practices every day. Right? So that kind of flows then automatically then into the next practice.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to number 54. Svavishaya samprayoge chittasya swarupānukāraha eva indriyanam pratyaharaha. A little bit longer sentence. Svavishaya samprayoge chittasya swarupānukāraha eva indriyanam pratyaharaha. So when the senses disengage from their respective objects of attraction and imitate, as it were, the nature of the mind, chitta, that is called pratyahara. Okay. So now, let's see. You want to repeat after me? Svavishaya asamprayoge chittasya swarupānukāraha iva indriyanam pratyaharaha. The meanings are, swa means their own, swa means self, your own self, basically. Something that belongs to you. Swa means belonging to you, belonging to something. Belonging to what? Sense objects. Vishaya. Vishaya, for example, if I look at somebody's image, somebody's face, that becomes my vishaya for my eyes. If I hear a sound, that's a vishaya for my ears. If I smell something, that smell is the vishaya for my nose, etc., etc. So the corresponding sense perceptions by these organs, that become their vishaya. Asamprayoge. Samprayoga means close contacts. Okay, close contact. Prayoga has a lot of different meanings. Prayoga, in a very common sense, it means utility or something, but it also means, it comes from the root word yuj. Yuj means to join something, to make connection with something. So prayoga means a deep connection. Samprayoga is even deeper connection. But when you add the prefix samprayoga means no connection, no contact. Okay, so that's why it is samprayoga means not getting into contact with of the mind. Chitta means of the mind. Swarupa, again, its own nature. Swa means own. Okay, own nature. Anukaraha. Anukara means imitation. Anukaraha. Anu means to follow something. Kara means to do, to follow, or doing the act of following something. That's imitation, okay, or resemblance, or close, you could say close resemblance. Iva is as if indriyanam, of the indriyas, the 10 senses basically. 10 senses. Pratyaharaha, that's the sense withdrawal. Okay? So when the senses disengage from their respective objects of attraction and imitate, as if, as it were, the nature of the mind, that is called pratyaharaha. Okay. Just hold on a second. All right. So now, what I was looking at is, this is an important and yet not very highly discussed or taught or practiced limb of yoga, and I'm sure you're aware of that. It's a very important part of the practice, but not many people in the classes, for example, they don't talk about it much and discuss it much. Okay. And it's most often referred to as an external limb along with the yamas, niyamas, asana, and pranayama. That's in Sutra 3.7. In that sutra, it says only dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are internal. The others are external. So how do we, in the progression that we just talked about, yamas and niyamas, truth, violence, etc., they help purify the mind. Asanas help in making the body strong, flexible, stable, and free of disease. Pranayama energizes the vital body, calms the mind, and aids in controlling the 5 senses. And then pratyahara helps disengage the mind from the senses and thus stabilizes the mind. And then the mind is then ready for meditation and samadhi. So this is a nice way of looking at this entire sequence that we have of the 8 limbs of yoga. Okay. So yamas and niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and finally the 3 stages of meditation: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Okay. Pratyahara. What is the structure of the word itself? Comes from prati, or against, or in the opposite direction. Prati means against or opposite direction. Ahara. Ahara means input basic. Ahara is also mean food. Okay. All right. So it also means any kind of input through the 5 senses. It's called ahara. Okay. So when it is coming into the 5 senses, it's called ahara. But when you prati means you kind of reverse that direction in the sense that you don't allow anything to come in from the 5 senses, then it becomes pratyahara. Okay. So withdrawing the senses, okay, from the objects of the senses. So it's like a turtle withdrawing its limbs into its own shell. Turtle, you can see that it kind of withdraws from all over, and you can see the turtle in a shell. You don't see its head or the legs, etc. So what they're saying is there are 3 levels of food, you can say, or the input. So the physical food, providing nourishment and energy in the form of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So this is the physical food, physical ahara, which is coming into the body, and it is developing these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. That's what we are composed of. Then we talk about the mental impressions that bring us subtle sense perceptions: sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. They are called the tanmatras. They're all coming through now through the 5 senses, but it's It's part of the mind. And deeper mental impressions are formed based on this. They are called samskaras through associations controlled by the three gunas. We've talked about the sattva, rajas, and tamas. Okay, so this is a kind of a progression of how we can get input or these input through the five senses, input into the body. Okay, physical input, then these subtle inputs of the senses, and finally deeper into our states of samskaras and vasanas, as they are called. I think I mentioned the word vasana also. Okay, and they're all controlled by the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And we've already mentioned that there are 11 sense organs, 5 organs of perception: ears, eyes, nose, tongue, and skin. 5 of action: feet for locomotion, hands for dexterity, organs of excretion, organs of reproduction, and the speech, that's tongue. Mind, of course, mind is connected to all these 10. That's a basic requirement for any of the above organs to function. All right. Still talking about pratyahara. Now, the way when I read some of these commentaries, I find that there are 2 kind of broad approaches to pratyahara that are mentioned. Okay, and this is my own kind of understanding of how pratyahara works. So first is to disengage the senses from being attracted to their respective sense objects. And through dispassion or vairagya, disengage the mind from the 5 senses. Okay, so the second one, the way I want to look at is that mind is unwilling to retrieve these inputs that are received from the 5 senses. There is a do not disturb sign. That's the way I look at it. You can, when you want to sit and stay quiet, you write a sign on the outside of the door, do not disturb, something like that. The senses will continue to receive input through the organs, okay? That doesn't stop. But mind can be trained to not listen to those inputs. And then the senses, when they are unable to distract the mind, they appear as if they are following the mind. Now, they are not even, they also become weak, basically. If the mind is not paying attention, they're saying, oh, let's go. Let's not bother about receiving input. And the commentators say the mind is like the queen bee, and the senses, the other bees that follow the queen bee. So the mind says, I'm not going to be bothered by anything coming from outside. Senses say, it's okay. I'm also not bothered. It's all right. Okay. This is just my own kind of reading of how we are constantly bombarded by the sensory overload. Okay. And these are the attractions through the media, television, newspaper, internet, everything, And, when we are constantly bombarded by these, it becomes really hard to control the mind and the senses, obviously, because bombarded constantly by these things, And then the senses begin to control the mind. Okay, we know that our senses, they control the mind, our thoughts, and our behavior, because we see something, we want it. Or we hear something, we want to listen to it, or it says, buy this, do this, you'll become the most beautiful person on earth, or buy this house and you'll be things like that. Or buy this lottery, you'll be a millionaire, and we are constantly controlled by those sensual inputs. And that's why, I always say that you can benefit from a sensory fast, similar to the body benefiting from a food fast. So you can do something like phone fast, TV fast, social media, Facebook. You know the list. Can you give up TV for a week? Can you give up your phone for even an hour? All right. So what are some of the techniques for practicing pratyahara? pranayama, in my opinion, is a very, very nice way of controlling the senses, because when you're focused deeply on pranayama, deeply, okay, then you kind of, the senses kind of follow the prana, or the vital life force, okay, and we energize the prana through these practices of pranayama, deep, slow breathing, and they will calm the nerves, soothing the mind, soothing the nerves. And when they do the kumbhaka practice, okay, then they say the yogi withdraws his awareness from the 5 senses in the kumbhaka. You're deeply focused inside. So to me, pranayama is a very great practice for doing pratyahara in a sense, because you're really deeply focused on just one thing, breathing. Inhale, out, exhale, breath retention, etc., etc. And of course, then these commentators, they give you all these other ideas. They call it karma pratyahara, controlling of the actions, selfless service, offering all actions and fruits to the Lord, to Ishvara, they say. Ishvara pranidhana, basically, that's what the term is. Ishvara pranidhana. That's karma pratyahara, controlling of actions, and focusing on one sense impression. They say if you look at, let's say, one item, one entity, if you look at, and that can give you pratyahara of the other senses. For example, you look at the blue sky or the ocean, etc., or listening to some soulful music, or just focusing on one item. All right, you're listening to some music, for example. People do these chants, even on YouTube, they have some chants which are repeated 1,000 times. Okay, same thing. But that is a beautiful way to bring the mind into a state of focus, and that itself becomes pratyahara, because then you're not hearing anything else, right? So we know these situations, right? If I'm reading something very intently, I'm engrossed in reading something, very deeply engrossed. Somebody calls out my name, I don't hear that, right? I don't know what's going on, because my mind is so deeply focused, even though the sound waves are impinging on my eardrums. They are, and they are being transmitted to my mind, but my mind is paying no attention. That's how we call, that's a deep state of pratyahara, when you're deeply engrossed in one sense perception. And creating positive impressions, meditate on nature, visiting, they say temples, offering incense, etc. These are all very positive impressions, all right? And there are some visualization techniques that are also mentioned by many as form of dharana practice, as form of pratyahara practice. You can visualize on a deity, a guru, or some enchanting natural scenery, etc. Very practical ways to develop a state of pratyahara. In our practices, in the yoga practices that we do, we always do a session on what we call yoga nidra, okay? And that's a very, very effective way to turn the senses inward. Is everyone familiar with yoga nidra, roughly? Anybody who's not? What's yoga nidra?
Yeah, can you maybe just go over it?
Well, basically what we do in the yoga nidra practice, I'm sure if you've attended yoga classes, they make you go into shavasana for a moment, and then you kind of, first of all, in the practice that I do, I tense up different parts of the body. I tighten every muscle in the body, real tight. What that does is bring the mind into a sense of awareness of every muscle in the body. And then you let go, okay? And then you go into shavasana, as it's called, and then you try to scan the body, one limb, one muscle, one joint at a time, and with a deep sense of awareness, just let go, loosen up. That's where the mind and body play a very harmonious role, okay? Mind listens to the body. If it finds any muscle that's tight, any kind of tension, any fatigue anywhere, they can work together and send in a wave of relaxation. Okay, so you go through this whole sequence of first tightening every muscle, then sending in waves of relaxation in a very beautiful, progressive manner, one muscle, one limb to the next. And when you do that whole process, the mind becomes so peaceful and calm, you're so deeply relaxed, you're almost completely cut off through the five senses at that point. So, okay, that's called the Yoga Nidra practice. And we do that in most of my, in all my classes. One other practice that I found very effective is the Brahmari Pranayama. I'm sure some of you know this. It's the humming bee practice of pranayama. And that itself includes a mudra, which is called Shanmukhi mudra, which means 6 openings are closed. Shan means 6. Shanmukhi. What are the 6 openings? 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 nose, and 1 mouth. You close these symbolically to shut everything out from the mind, all the senses. And then you do this humming bee sound. And it's a beautiful sound. It really calms the mind. It really helps you keep the mind very peaceful and quiet. And I personally use this sometimes for my own dharana practice. And you can do that same, okay? Another practice that you must have, I'm sure some of you must have practiced, is called Trataka. And normally it's practiced with a lighted candle. You gaze on the flame of the candle. Anybody done this practice? Candle gazing, Trataka? Anyone? No, nobody has done this. I'm sure some of you have done this.
So, Subhashi, we do it with you regularly.
Right. This we've done many times. Yeah. Anybody else has done it? Candle gazing? No. It's a very beautiful practice. You would love it. You should learn it and do this practice. I have a blog article on my blog, and you can go through that. I have a YouTube video on this practice. You can practice. Very nice practice. Okay. Then I also do a pratyahara meditation in my practice, in my classes, where we connect with each of the 5 senses one at a time and then disengage the mind from that sense. It's a very nice practice. You will enjoy it. Okay. So that's the practice of pratyahara.
I have a question, Subhashi.
Yes, please. Yes, Nirupma.
So, how isn't it more beneficial, of course, to do it for a long time?
Say that again. Repeat that.
The duration for which you do at a time, right? That is I feel the key to really going more deep into this state. So what is that? Is that recommended anywhere, like an hour at the minimum, or what is
No. I mean, there's no way you can put a limit, because everyone has time availability limitations. So depending on how much time you want to allocate to your practice, that's how I recommend, right? Normal recommendation from most teachers is that, a minimum of 30 minutes of meditation. That's what most people will tell you, right? And in my own approach that I follow, let's say if I do a 30-minute meditation, what I want to do is to do about 10 to 12 minutes of dharana practice, whatever that is, whether it's candle gazing or this pratyahara dharana meditation or soham meditation. We do many practices. Okay? What I would, in my own practice, that's what I do, 10 to 12 minutes of that practice, and then followed with my mantra meditation for the remaining time. Okay. Of course, you can make it longer. That's beautiful. All right. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next one now. Okay. It's the last sutra in chapter 2, number 55. It says, Tataha parama vashyata indriyanam. Parama vashyata indriyanam. Then follows supreme mastery over the senses. So you can repeat after me. Tataha parama vashyata indriyanam. Well, it's kind of a, sometimes I feel that's like putting the cart before the horse or something, but anyway, but let's look at it. Tataha means from this, from what? From the practice of pratyahara. That's basically, always referring to that. All right. Pratyahara. From the practice of pratyahara, tataha, parama. Parama means supreme. Supreme, the highest level. Supreme. Supreme, highest level of what? Vashyata. Control, subjugation. Of what? Indriyanam. Of the 5 senses. Of the 10 senses, basically. Okay. So when you follow these guidelines of pratyahara, that means when you're able to do this, disengage the mind from, disengage the 5 sense organs from their respective objects, and then you follow the mind, that's pratyahara, and then you eventually become totally in control of your own 5, of your own senses. I keep saying 5, but there are 10 senses. 5 senses of sense perception and 5 of action. Okay, you control all of those, basically. All right. So this is again based on some of the comments that I've read in the texts, the commentaries. What they're saying is not being addicted to the 5 senses, and reaching out and gaining experience of external objects which are not prohibited by the scriptures. Okay? So again, who controls all these guidelines? Basically, they say, the Vedas and the ancient scriptures, they will tell us, what you can aspire to have, what you cannot aspire to have, things like that. And that's all mentioned in our ancient texts. Okay. And because in Patanjali Yoga Sutras also, he talks about many objects which you want to focus on actually as a form of dharana. And then you can meditate on those. That's what he's saying. But they have to be specified in our ancient texts. Okay, and experiencing the objects only as a result of free will, not drawn in by the objects. This is very important. Okay, so I always like to, mention that, look, it doesn't mean that you're not attracted to your food. All it means is that should not become binding on your mind. Okay, if you don't get the food that you like, don't feel upset, don't feel disheartened. It's okay, stay quiet, peaceful. That's what I say. Okay, and this experience of an object can lead to full knowledge of the object without causing pleasure or pain, as we have no likes or dislikes for external objects. Okay, this is exactly the concept presented in Sankhya. What they are saying is that you have to attain full knowledge of whatever you're focusing on, whether it's a physical object, whether it's a mental construct, a thought or something. But we need to be aware of all these objects, okay, but not be attracted to them, not be attached to them. That's the whole idea, okay? And the pleasure and pain are the results of ego identification. We know that, all right? So complete elimination and contact with the objects is final controllability and comes about when the mind is fully one-pointed. Any stage other than the last stage can take us back to a state of no control over the senses. Even a snake expert would not sleep next to a venomous snake thinking that he knows how to control snakes. Just an example they gave you. You don't want to mess around with snakes. I mean, you may have sense control, but the snake may not have sense control. Okay. All right. Oh, this is a story that I read from the Bhagavad Purana. It's one of the Puranas. So what that story says was that, look, to avoid lure of senses, this guy, this sage Saburi, it's called Saubhari. he meditates underwater. He says, I'm going to go in water because I'm not going to be bothered by any sense attractions. I'm going to go underwater. And we went to the river Yamuna. That's one of the big rivers in India. And the implication was perfect sense and breath control, kumbhaka, etc. But then, while he was meditating, he opened his eyes and he saw two fish mating. Okay, so he saw two fish mating, and that aroused his passion. That's it. That was enough to get him out of meditation. He gives it up and goes to the king, and then he begs his daughter's hand in marriage. Actually, he wanted many of his daughters to marry him. Okay, I think that's the story. The king had many daughters, and he wanted to marry all of them. And apparently, he did marry all of them, and then there's a whole long story that's mentioned in the Bhagavad Purana. But the point is, mind is so fickle, it can get distracted at any given instance. So you really have to be very deeply in control over these five senses. And then, of course, there is a story of our famous Ramayana, where Sita, when she was in captivity, right? She was in captivity by Ravana, okay? And then she had perfect sense control. Ravana tried to lure her in so many different ways, and yet she never gave up. Okay? So these are some of the examples of how people have attained self-control through pratyahara. And there are some strong examples of the pratyahara in Gita. I'm not going to read these. You can read these in my slides. All right. So that pretty much concludes our discussion of what's in chapter 2. I think we covered pretty much every sutra in chapter 2. I think we did. All right. These are nice verses in the Gita, which are very nice. Read them sometime. All right. Any thoughts or questions so far? We are past 12 o'clock. Any thoughts or questions so far? Now, as I mentioned, today is the lesson number 14. That was my original plan. Obviously, you can see that I have no idea how to assess how much time I'm going to take in doing these programs. Okay, so I thought I'll be able to finish in 14 sessions, but I'm not even close. All right, so that's why I mentioned that at least let's have 4 more sessions. Now, some of you have responded already. And Maitri, you said you will be able to attend sessions in August, right?
Yes.
Okay. Chanda, you said you're okay?
Yes.
And Nimesha said she's okay with 3 of these 4, which is fine. Manjula, you're okay with August sessions?
I'm traveling, Shubhashji, so I may not be able to attend, but that's okay. If you go ahead, I will use the recordings. That's fine.
How about Nirupma?
Yes, I can attend, Subhashi.
Sonal?
Most likely.
Yes, Subhashi, I'll be able to attend in August.
Okay. And Venu?
Yes, Subhashji, I'll be able to attend in August.
So I think we have enough, kind of quorum that we will continue. I just want to make sure there are at least 4 or 5 people who are attending. All right. So we'll continue in August because July, many people are traveling, etc. So all the, I guess the 4 Sundays in August, we'll try to allocate to this. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to finish everything, even in those 4 sessions, but I'll do the best, okay? Kind of try and cover at least the concept of meditation and Ishvara. Those are the two things that I definitely want to cover. And then we'll see what we can do after that. All right. Is that okay, everyone? All right, let's close the eyes. Sitting up, comfortable, relaxed. Let's recite Om once now. Deep inhalation. Om. Let's do the invocation one more time. Yogena chittasya padena vacha malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakrasidharinam Sahasra Shirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim. Do the Shanti mantra. Inhale. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead me from unreal to the real, darkness to light, from the fear of death to the knowledge of immortality. Peace, peace, peace. Rub the palms briskly. Softly cover the eyes with the palms. Relax the eyes. Release the hands, join the palms again. Raise them up and then slowly bend forward as you exhale. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. I bow down to all my gurus, all my teachers, and as always, I'd like to pay a very special tribute to our special guru, Sage Patanjali. Slowly come back up. Thank you. Namaste. Have a wonderful rest